are if you are uncomfortable with your likeness being recorded, feel free to just turn your camera off or whatever you would like. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and then I'll feed questions to Kara either when she's done presenting or if something feels really timely. So you can message them to the full group, or you can message them just to me. And on that note, here is, I have to say, one of my two favorite Commerce staff members. The other one obviously is Ben, Kara, and I am so happy to have her here because she really, really speaks the language of sole proprietor and many small business. And also she speaks the language specifically of arts small business and what that looks like and all of the different varieties. So it's always great to have her leading these because she gets what your life is like and what your taxes are like and what your income is like, which is, you know, pretty rare in the like large money small business world. So I'm gonna mute myself and turn it over to Kara.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Molly. I am very glad to be here. Molly and I fairly recently even figured out that we share certain crafty tendencies, which was very exciting to me. Yes, that one specifically. She held up her knitting if you can't see Molly. So I'm really happy to be here. I am a policy advisor at the Executive Office of Commerce. We have a grant program open right now called the Rhode Island Rebounds Small Business Grant Program. What I'm going to do is share my screen and go on ahead and run through a fairly quick presentation. So we can all sort of share an understanding of the program, its basic eligibility requirements and the parameters. And then I would love to take questions and especially focus on the needs and questions that the creative small businesses in this group might have, because I know they can be a bit different than some of my other applicants and participants. So I'm really glad that we're doing this session today. So the Rhode Island Rebounds Small Business Grant Program is actually very similar to the Relief Grant Program that was run in 2021. And I start by saying that because if you are an applicant to that program, a lot of the program requirements and the way I'm going to talk about it will sound familiar. So the Rhode Island Rebound Small Business Grant Program offers grants at 2 levels for small businesses that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We're offering a $2,500 grant and a $5,000 grant. We have a total pool of $12.5 million available. And this is part of the broader Rhode Island's Rebounds initiative. So there will be additional grant programs coming out for larger hospitality, arts and tourism initiatives. There will be a technical assistance program, some Take It Outside, as well as some capital improvement funding available for businesses that need to do updates to their space. So today we're going to talk about the $12.5 million pool, but I always like to make sure that folks know there's going to be an additional set of programs available in this larger family of Rhode Island Rebounds initiatives. So the application is open now, and this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say. The application is going to close on Tuesday, February 15th at 3:30 p.m. So if you have started an application, if you've created a login, that is fantastic. If you have not, please make sure to do so if you're eligible for this funding in the near term. Again, the application is going to close on Tuesday, February 15th, 2022 at 3:30 p.m. So that is in 5 days. We are looking at what we'll do if the program ends up being oversubscribed. So we want to prioritize businesses that haven't received COVID-19 financial assistance before, who are very small or who are MBE or WBE. So if you are a new applicant to one of the state's grant programs for small businesses, I fully encourage you to apply. We're really trying to reach out to COVID-19 impacted businesses that haven't been able to participate in our grant programs previously. You're able to apply for this program through the commerceri.com website, and I'm going to show you that website and where to go in just a moment. So this is a big list of bullets on the screen. I am not going to read them all out to you, but I do want to hit a couple of the highlights. This is targeted to businesses, so not nonprofit entities. It must be a for-profit. You can be a sole prop, you can be an incorporated entity, just any business. You do have to have gross receipts or sales of less than $1 million in either 2020 or 2021. You have to have been in business prior to October 1st of 2021. And you need to not be permanently closed. We know that some businesses have unfortunately not been able to survive the pandemic. And unfortunately, this grant program isn't targeted to a businesses that may have had to close, unfortunately. Most industries and business types are eligible. We do restrict, unfortunately, we can't find government-owned entities or offices of elected officials, K through 12, or universities, lobbying, or political organizations. And there are other funding sources available specifically for real estate professionals and landlords. So this program is also not open to real estate professionals and landlords. But beyond that, very broad eligibility requirements. I do want to put a note that with the new funding, and this is different than our previous grant programs, with this new funding, unfortunately, the businesses who receive this money do need to file for both SAM.gov and get a DUNS number. I only say unfortunately because the SAM.gov process will probably take you about 45 minutes to an hour to work through, and then it takes about a week to process. So that is likely to be more time consuming than our application itself, but I don't want that to put anybody off. And even though the application closes this Tuesday, you do not have to have completed and gotten your DUNS number and SAM.gov registration complete by February 15th or whenever you apply. Go ahead and apply, and we'll have a bit of time available for you to complete those processes. But again, these registrations, these federal registrations, are a Treasury requirement of these particular federal dollars that we're using to fund this grant program. I do want to do a quick preview of what the application looks like and just show you guys the couple of steps that are involved. So let me go ahead and switch over to a web browser, and then we can jump on in and start taking questions. All right. So the main and most important website to know for these programs is commerceri.com/RI Rebounds. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to put that into the chat right now, because I want to make sure that this group has that link. When you're on that page, we have a lot of resources available. There's actually a full video walkthrough of the application. We have a list of We have like an easy to apply checklist, so you can see what you need to know in advance, what the eligibility requirements are. We also have a list of some technical assistance providers, including groups like the Rhode Island Society of CPAs. So if you're having trouble figuring out if you're eligible, or if you need to understand what your net need might be to apply for this grant, come on and visit us. You can email us directly at CommerceRI, or you can reach out directly to a technical assistance partner and get help preparing to apply or applying for this grant. On our website, when you scroll down, there's a blue button. It says apply now. The way that this application works is you do create a registration or a login to an online application portal. So you put in your name, you put in your email, complete the reCAPTCHA. So you do have to do that step. Once you've created your login, the application itself is actually just effectively 3 pages long. And so I just wanted to do a quick show. The first page is an application initiation. This is going to be the bulk of the application. So the first page of the application is going to ask you if you've experienced revenue loss, what industry are you in, what other sources of funding have you received historically, what were your gross receipts and sales? Because again, we are only targeting businesses that are under $1 million. It will ask if you need additional assistance with your application. If you select yes, we have those flagged and somebody will reach out to help you. We have all of the eligibility questions. So again, big first page, lots of questions, but all very straightforward. And again, we have technical assistance providers that can jump on and do a one-on-one if you'd like to walk through the application step by step. The second part of the application is business information. So we'll collect the name of your business, your address, that sort of information. And then the last page is we'll ask for you to sign an attestation. I can actually show you what that looks like. It's a very simple document that says that you are the business owner applying, that you have provided truthful information, and that everything you've put in the application is true to the best of your knowledge. It's 3 steps. It's very simple and straightforward. And again, I want to emphasize that we both have the technical assistance partners available to assist. And then we also have those SAM.gov and DUNS requirements, which we can also have a technical partner assist with if you'd like it. And that those don't need to be completed when you submit your application. There will be additional time. So Molly, I know that I just said a lot of things very, very fast, but I just wanted to ground on the basics of the program and the application requirements, and then really spend the bulk of our time together answering questions.
Great. I've got several questions for you already.
Perfect.
And some of them are really good basic questions. So the first one is, do you need to be registered as a business to apply? For example, do you have to have created an LLC or be a corp, or can you just be a sole proprietor who files a Schedule C?
You do not need to be an incorporated entity. Sole proprietors are both welcome and encouraged to apply. With our relief grant program, just as an example, about 1/3 of our funded applicants were actually sole proprietors. And we recognize that a lot of our hardest impacted industries, a lot of our creative businesses associated, especially with hospitality and tourism, so our DJs and our photographers and our makeup artists, these are all sole proprietors. So you are not just eligible, you're encouraged to apply, especially if you've been negatively impacted.
So here's one that Kara and I were talking about before, and is something we talk about a lot. I'm hearing from folks that they don't think this is for them because they're just an individual artist and not a business owner. So will you tell us what it means to be a business owner as an artist?
So if you are generating revenue, also known as income, from your arts business, you are an arts business. You do not need to be incorporated. You don't need to be an LLC or an S Corp. Most commonly, you're probably filing a Schedule C as part of your personal income taxes. And so that Schedule C is your business incomes. That very much means that you're a business and eligible for this program. And when we talk about net need and the 2 levels of the grant for this program, what we're looking at is how have your revenues been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I bet when you're preparing your Schedule C, we're in tax season now, and looking at perhaps 2019, which was the last year we had before the pandemic, if you see a loss there, then you have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and you're going to probably meet the requirements of this grant and be eligible.
Okay, I'm going to try and filter these by topic, but they're coming in fast and furious, which is exactly why we have all of this time for questions, y'all. Okay, so I'm getting some questions about income versus revenue. So can you explain if it's just about what the grant is based on, if it's based on money coming in or what your revenue is after your business expenses?
So to calculate your net financial need, if you use the grant calculator, which is a tool that we have online if you need it, it's not a requirement that you submit the grant. We are looking at your gross receipts or sales. And so your gross receipts or sales are the total number at the highest level before you deduct your expenses or anything else. I will, if it's all right, Molly, just add, I've gotten a couple of questions from folks who have picked up part-time jobs or second jobs, particularly as their business has been impacted. Do not include the income if you have like a second job. Like if you are, I don't care if you're working at a local coffee shop or the Target or whatever it is, that is not your arts business. And so for the grant calculator, we want the gross receipts and sales from your actual business activities.
Whew, just rocking all the questions. All right, let me, okay, so what is the impact of, there's a lot of folks here who are either receiving regular unemployment or were receiving pandemic unemployment assistance. Does that make folks ineligible? What income does that, what impact does that have?
So receiving other forms of assistance, whether it's unemployment insurance or it is one of our previous grant programs, does not make you ineligible for our grant program. But in that instance, what I encourage you to do is to use our grant calculator. I am going to add a link to the grant calculator in the chat. I can also do a walkthrough of it if it's helpful, but everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. And so if you've gotten previous financial assistance, whether it's UI or a relief grant or a PPP in 2021, none of that makes you ineligible, but what you probably need to do is use our grant calculator to actually calculate your net need and see if you're at the $2,500 level or the $5,000 level so that you can complete the application correctly and accurately.
Okay, sorry, y'all have so many questions and it's freaking amazing, which I love. Okay, so let me say that I do think it would be helpful at some point to walk through the grant calculator. Here are some other good questions. Do folks have to have their 2021 taxes done?
You do not. You do need to know what your 2021 gross receipts or sales are, though. So that may involve doing step one of your taxes. It may involve pulling information out of if you use like a QuickBooks or a FreshBooks. You just need to know the number. You don't have to have done your taxes.
And then I know that you've answered this question already, but what about if folks have gotten, what is the impact of other grants, relief grants during COVID? So for example, the previous rounds of Commerce's small business relief grants, also things like artist relief fund grants that RISCA offered.
Well, let's go ahead and actually take a quick look at the grant calculator in this
Yes.
case. I think that it was going to be worth, especially because it sounds like we're going to have a couple of questions all around what you need to include or not include. So I did put the link in the chat. It's grantcalculator.commerceri.com. Again, this is not the official application. This is an optional step. It can be helpful in figuring out what level of grant you're eligible for them. So what you can do is you can just enter your business name. This is helpful if you're going to download it. And then what we do is we ask what year your business was established. So we have 3 separate calculators. We have one for businesses that were established before 2019. That is because if you were in operation before 2019, you would have a full year there, a pre-COVID, pre-pandemic full year that we can compare your current revenues to. The second calculator is if you were established during 2019. And then the third is if you are a newer business that began operating between 2020 or 2021. And so the difference between the 3 is, again, with 2019, we know that we have a full year that we can compare your 2021 revenues to. For 2019, we actually ask how many months you were in operation, and then we annualize your 2019 revenues. The calculator does that for you. And then instead of comparing 2019 to 2021 revenues, for our new businesses established in either 2020 or 2021, we actually just ask if you're operating at a loss. So for those new businesses, instead of trying to compare year over year revenues, we compare your revenues against your expenses in 2021. So the most common is going to be established before 2019. So let's take a look at that. And then we can look at the questions around previous financial assistance. And then if you have increased COVID costs, what those will look like. So I am going to pretend that my business made $50,000 in 2019, and I actually did pretty okay in 2021. I ended up with $48,000. The next question, after it asks you for those two gross receipts figures, again, that's your 2019 and your 2021 gross receipts or sales figures. The next question is, did you receive any COVID-19 financial assistance in 2021 from a federal, state, or local government entity? And there's these little blue question marks, which will actually pop up with additional information. So if you got a grant from us or from anybody else in 2020, we don't care. We do not want you to include those. We only are concerned with this calculation and figuring out if you have 2021 unmet financial need. So we have a list here of the most common kinds of 2021 grant funding that were available. So we've got, like, if you ended up with an EIDL, a PPP, our Commerce Relief Grant Program, those are all examples of things that would have been funding your business in 2021. So if you got, say, a relief grant in 2021, you would list in that you received $5,000. So as you can see, this calculator is automatically updating for me. And right now it says I have negative $3,000 of net need. So right now, this example, this business example, is not eligible. But the next question it asks is, if you have additional COVID-related expenses or increased costs, that should be taken into consideration. So if you ended up having to hire people at a higher rate due to COVID-19 than you would have previously, we have an opportunity for you to add those costs. If you had increased rent or mortgage during 2021, we have a space for that. Utility costs, if you ended up having to invest in technology, let's say you've continued to move onto online, so you have some website upgrades, possibly camera equipment, new laptop, you can include all of those kinds of costs into this increased cost calculator. Then down at the bottom, it'll continue to add up. It'll figure out what your net need is, and then it will give you a result at the bottom of whether or not you're eligible for a grant, and if you're eligible at the $2,500 level or the $5,000 level. So it is a bunch of steps, but we try to take into consideration when we're calculating net need for these grant programs. If you've previously gotten assistance, that would offset losses of revenue. And if you've had increased costs, especially as they relate to COVID-19 impacts on your business, that have also impacted your ability to realize revenue. So let me stop sharing. And then Molly, I don't believe we have the grant that you had specifically listed, the Risca Arts grant, on that list. And I think my leading question is, was that one publicly funded? Is that a state grant, or is that privately funded?
That's a really excellent question. And the answer is yes, it is both privately and publicly funded. So some public funds went into that, but it was a private grant that folks applied for through us, but the money was awarded to them from a private nonprofit.
Let me double check, because if it was partially private, we're only looking at public assistance. And then the other one that is coming up is the unemployment. And let me double check. We were only asking if it was pandemic unemployment, like the enhanced unemployment. So I believe that our restriction was on, or restriction's not quite the right word, but I believe we were only asking applicants to include pandemic unemployment specifically. So let me go ahead and make sure that's still the case. And if that's all right, I will follow up with you, Molly, directly with that.
Oh yeah, probably we'll do one of the same things that we did last time around, which was create a little FAQ on Risca's website. And then also, as y'all know, I'm recording this, so I can send out the recording. We'll post the recording on the website.
Yep.
Okay.
Actually, I know you're doing the chat, but I am noticing somebody noted that oh, it didn't ask them all these questions, and then they said, never mind. So I do just want to make sure everybody knows that the grant calculator is an optional portion of the application to help you figure out what your net financial need is. If you happen to know your gross receipts from 2019 to 2021, and you've got greater than $5,000 and you didn't receive any other financial assistance, like your calculation is much easier and you do not need to do that grant calculator.
So just to confirm, nonprofits are not eligible for this grant, correct?
So that is correct. Likely to be eligible for other programming we offer, but not the small business grant program.
And I'll say, if you're an arts nonprofit, stay tuned, because my wonderful and beautiful colleague, Todd Trebor, is working with Commerce, with our other favorite Commerce staff member, Ben Mays, on something for arts nonprofits that is yet to come out. So nonprofits, you'll be taken care of. You just got to be a little patient. Okay. Ooh, so many questions, y'all. I love these questions. Okay. Hey, Kara, what kinds of things can people use these grants for? So most of these folks are used to project-based grants where they can only use them to do a specific project. So once folks get the money, what can they do with it?
So the uses of funds is really flexible. So we have three broad categories that we have listed in our FAQ, which is the wages and/or salaries of employees to avoid furloughs and layoffs. And that's sort of very broad. You've been financially impacted by COVID-19. That is how you're demonstrating your eligibility for this. So if you need to use this to pay your salaries or wages, completely acceptable. We also have facilitating the reopening of a business or a particular line of business if the normal business operations have been negatively impacted due to the pandemic. So I think what might be a good example for some of the businesses in this webinar in particular are if you had to move completely online and you've been, say, teaching online, selling online, and you're moving back and you're going back and securing new studio space or going back into venues and have rental costs, all of that kind of thing would be eligible. And then the last part are your operational costs incurred to enable the business to remain open. Again, operational costs incurred to enable the business to remain open. That basically means all of your operating costs. So it is intended to be very broad. Again, it should be tied to the way your business has been impacted by COVID-19, but it's intended to be very broad and very flexible to support you as you're recovering from the global pandemic.
So for an artist, operating costs could include things like how much you're paying for your website to be hosted, registration for craft fairs. So for example, if you are doing any of the craft fairs, which would include things like the PVD Artisans Market next to the farmers market, those registrations, or PVD Flea, that would be an operating cost. What about things for like visual artists where they're like, okay, well, part of my normal operating cost is to buy paint.
Absolutely.
What about folks who are teaching artists and do teaching based out of their studios? Would physical improvements to make it more safe, for example, air filters, et cetera, would that count?
And I'm smiling because I love that example. Yeah, so especially if you have costs that are unmet because you're doing things to be COVID-19 safe, like the example Molly was just giving, like making your space safe, upgrading your air filters, investing in having like extra hand sanitizer available at your, desk or sign-in space, whatever it might be, all of those operational costs would be eligible uses for these grant funds. So the other question that we frequently get is, do you have to report out how you used the funding? And for this grant, no, you do not. What we will do though, is we will send a survey out to our grant recipients, probably at around the 6-month mark and at the 1-year mark, asking If you're still in business, generally how things are going, how has your recovery been? If you have employees, are you still employing folks? So we do surveys afterwards, but there is no like a mandated reporting requirement on the use of funds.
Yeah, Jacques, to answer your question, I would say yes on computer upgrade and design software for your business. Yes. And for you, it would also cover things like studio time at AS220 or AS220 Industries membership, because that's part of your operating costs for your business. Okay. And then April Brown asked a question about fiscal sponsorship. And my answer is April, Kara, Ben, Mays, and Todd and I will get back to you, because it's likely that we'll figure out a way for Links and Hughes to apply for the nonprofit grant, but we can talk about your work specifically separate from Links and Hughes. I'm gonna answer some of these questions are weird enough that I'll just answer them. And I did take a note, April. What about folks if they are filing joint taxes with their husband or other partners, married filing jointly? And so it's 20% of your income, but it might not be 20% of the married filing jointly income.
We only want to know about you as the individual artist or you as the business owner. So if you're married filing jointly, when we ask that 20% income question, it's only for you as the individual. It's not for you as a household filing jointly. Actually, there's another one. Is it all right if I say the person's name so they know I'm answering their question, or should
I think that's fine.
So Willa asks, if I'm an individual artist and in a gallery, can I apply as an artist and also as a gallery, or do I need to pick one? And the reason I wanted to ask this question is, or answer this question is because I bet there's a few others with similar type of questions. We can only do one grant per legal entity. So if you're a sole proprietor, your business is one entity. If you're a sole proprietor and you're filing your Schedule C, and you have your artist activities, but then you also have an incorporated, call it your gallery, a studio, something else that is like an LLC or an S Corp, that is an entirely separate legal entity, and you can submit 2 applications, one for each of those. So, and the reason I wanted to highlight that is because a couple of times I've gotten asked from people who have, as a sole proprietor, multiple business lines, but not separate entities. If you're a sole proprietor and you have, say, one trade name that you're teaching under and then a separate trade name that you're selling under, if you do not have those set up as separate entities, we can only do one grant for you. So it is one grant per entity. If you happen to be the owner or have control of more than one entity, say 2 LLCs, or you're a sole prop plus an LLC, submit an application for each eligible entity.
I deleted that one. Okay, so what if folks made more money on unemployment or with a stimulus than they did as an artist? So it looks like their overall income went sort of up during the pandemic, but the art income itself went down.
So
I think this is another question about whether or not unemployment and stimulus count.
So let's make sure that we're only looking at 2021 and that we're comparing 2021 to 2019, because a lot of the stimulus and like the pandemic unemployment was in 2020. And so we're not looking at 2020. If, however, in 2021, you've received pandemic specific grant funding, and so your total gross receipt plus that additional funding is above your 2019 level, then unless you have some increased cost specifically due to COVID-19, you are probably not eligible for this grant.
But So here's a related question: is if your art income, if your income went up, but also your expenses went up, so you can still show a loss, are you eligible?
Exactly. And so Renee is actually giving us great examples. If your supplies and studio rent also went up, you can include, say, that rent. We have a specific spot on the grant calculator. Let me actually pop back over to it. There's a grant calculator. So on the grant calculator, under the increased cost calculator, you can enter your increased rent or mortgage interest payments. If that was raised, it's in response to COVID-19, you can go ahead and include that figure. Now, for things like inventory or COVID-19 supplies and equipment, we wouldn't be able to include the regular cost of your normal supplies as increased COVID-19 related expenses. If you have things that you've purchased like masks or other PPE or hand sanitizer, plexiglass, those are items that you could count, but unfortunately not just like the normal regular inventory or supplies that you're buying.
I think this has really been answered. So I'm just going to say, does it want gross income or adjusted gross income? One question asks for revenue. Is that gross? So I would say to the person who used that, who asked that, I don't know at what point you asked that, but use the grant calculator because that'll help you. Okay, so what if someone wants to use 2020 instead of 2021? Does it have to be, if someone was in business in 2019, do you have to use the years 2021 and 2019 for this grant?
So for this grant, we are specifically looking at whether or not your business had unmet financial need in 2021. So fully recognizing that 2020 was most likely the year everyone was most impacted, we had other programs and supports for that. And this grant is specifically focused on 2021.
So it would not include, you would not include expenses that you had in 2020, like buying PPE and COVID supplies if you bought them in 2020, only if you bought them in 2021.
That's right, only 2021. And so if you're also looking at other funding you've received, like don't include your 2021, like if you got a Restore grant, if you got an EIDL grant that year, if you got the 2021 version of the pandemic unemployment, don't include any of your 2020 numbers in this calculation.
What if folks have not submitted a tax return in 2019? I know folks don't need to have completed their 2021 taxes, but what if they didn't do a 2019 tax return?
So we are not requiring for 95% of applicants any documentation or supporting information for your application. When you submit it, that last page I showed with the attestation, that is you signing and swearing that you have told us the truth in your application. We are, however, doing a 5% audit. So 5% of our applicants will be asked to show supporting documentation for their grant agreement. And that can include things like either your 2019 and 2021 tax returns, or if they're not complete, printouts from your point of sale system or a ledger that you keep. So for most applicants, we are relying on you giving us correct and accurate information. For the 5%, when you're asked to submit documentation, having your tax returns is quite frankly the easiest. It gives us all the information we need to validate your application and move you right through the process. But it is not an actual program eligibility requirement that you have filed.
Awesome. I'm still getting a lot of questions about unemployment. So just so you all know, I'm going to clear out the other non-unemployment questions before we go back to that topic, but I see them and I know that these it's confusing. Okay, so if you're approved for funding, are there any other follow-up documents once you've gotten the grant that you'll need to submit in order to accept it?
No, so what the grant process looks like is you submit your application. If you're a part of that 95% pool, we do the review process entirely internally. It's a desktop scan. You do have to do that DUNS and SAM.gov registration that we mentioned earlier, but that's also something that we can see and check. So again, we don't require any document uploads from our applicants in 95% of cases. If you're approved, you're then sent a couple of documents to complete and sign. You get a W-9 and you get a grant agreement. Once you've completed those documents, we will mail you a check. After that, you are done with us. There is not follow-on reporting or additional documentation required. We will send out a survey probably around the 6-month and the 1-year mark, just trying to measure the impact of these grant funds, finding out if businesses are still in business, if you had employees, if you still have employees, that kind of thing. But no, after you're approved and we issue your grant award as a check, that is the end of your legal obligations to us.
And then sort of to continue on with how these grants are reviewed and decided on, how are y'all, so for RISCA, so a lot of these folks are used to a peer review panel looking through everybody's grants and awarding based on knowing there's significantly less funds than there are applications. How are y'all, what's the process for y'all to select who will be getting grants once folks have passed an eligibility screen?
So I will say at this point in time, we are not oversubscribed. So I encourage you, if you're eligible, to apply. We do have 5 more days left. We're looking at maxing out, but we're not looking at being oversubscribed. So the first thing I would say is, like, please take your time, and if you're eligible, put in an application. If we are oversubscribed, we are going to prioritize a couple of categories. One of our main focuses is people that have not received a small business grant from us or the state of Rhode Island previously. So if you are not somebody that has previously received a Rhode Island state business grant, that is one of our priority groups. We're also focusing on funding MBEs and WBEs, and then very small businesses. And we're looking at the data to determine what exactly will qualify as a very small business if we are oversubscribed.
So that's good news for y'all, because most of y'all will likely fall into the very small business category. And then I will say about the MBE and WBE designation, I know we've been working on sort of demystifying what that is and how to certify. But this won't be helpful in time for this grant application, but we will be working with the office here at the state that does MBE and WBE certification. That's minority and women-owned businesses. We'll be providing a webinar on why you should do that and how to do that in March with the folks at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and it's an O, I don't remember. But anyway, the good news there is that the person running that webinar, also an artist, y'all, we're everywhere. Okay. Do you need a physical location in Rhode Island other than sort of working out of your home office or home studio?
No, you do not. We do ask for your address, and you do need to make sure you give us a correct address because we mail checks. But no, it does not need to be a separate space that you are renting.
And then how soon do you think you'll be sending out notifications? So if the application sort of first review / deadline is on the 15th, how soon do you think you'll plow through all of these applications?
So we have already started to review them. So it is likely that we will be able to start letting people know that they're getting an award early to middle of next week. Because again, we have folks that we know check all 3 boxes of the potential priority groups. So we're able to start immediately. And again, this is a relatively quick process. It's mostly desktop scans verifying that you are who you say you are, that you're a business, that sort of thing. Probably the hardest part, the part that might take the longest, is if you don't have a DUNS number and a SAM.gov registration. Getting a DUNS number will usually take about a day. It's very quick to ask for, but it'll take about a day to process. And then SAM.gov, you do have to allocate a bit of time to walk through the federal process to request that. And then it does take them between 7 and 10 days to process. So a little bit of our timeline hinges on our eligible applicants completing these additional federal processes.
And I'll just give a shout out for y'all figuring out DUNS and SAM.gov, because you do not need that for RISCA grants as an individual artist. But because this is federal money, it's, you know, it's there's a lot more, just so you all know, there's a lot more strings that come attached that Commerce is having to deal with because it's ARPA, it's federal dollars. So this isn't them not understanding very small businesses. It's their hands are tied based on the legislation. And so I know that they have offered, and I think CW, Center for Women in Enterprise, has offered a webinar just on how to register for DUNS and SAM.gov. So I strongly recommend you check those out. Additionally, one thing we do see with SAM.gov is a lot of scams. So I just want to flag it for you. If you register for SAM.gov and ever get anything in your email saying your SAM.gov registration is expired, or anybody asking you to pay money to re-register or update your registration for SAM.gov, that is a scam. It will never cost you money to register with SAM.gov. So that's important.
Well, we are getting a bunch of questions around it. So let me build on that and say also, if you Google like SAM registration or like federal SAMs, the first few Google results or whatever your search engine of choices will be ads for services that will charge between $500 and $600 to do that registration. It is completely free to register, and CWE does have a webinar. And I also put back in the link for Commerce's webpage for this program, because we have a couple of helpful walkthroughs, and then we have the contact information for our technical assistance partners who have gotten a level of training in doing these registrations as well. So you don't have to go it alone, and you also do not have to pay for it. I just want to also note for sole proprietors, it can be a little confusing when you go on to the DUNS website, which is Duns and Bradstreet, and it's the data, I'm sorry, what is it? The Universal Numbering System. I'm forgetting the D, it's fine. You do have to upload.
Dun and Bradstreet, it literally is, it's Dun and Bradstreet. I don't even remember what DUN stands for.
Exactly.
But the link's in there.
The part that gets a little confusing is it asks for you to upload 2 documents in the name of your business. If you are a sole proprietor and you are filing a Schedule C, the name of your business is your name. So for example, I am Kara Kunst. If I was requesting my DUNS number as a sole proprietor, I would want to submit like my phone bill and say an invoice from another business that have my name, Kara Kunst, on them. So that is one of the things that can be a little bit confusing, is it does say to upload documents in your business name. If you're a sole proprietor, your business name is your name. And other than that, it's the exact same process as if you were an incorporated entity. Oh, and Joy, a couple of folks are also asking, so let me repeat. The application date, you can apply through February 15th at 3:30 p.m. You do not need to have your DUNS and your SAM.gov complete at that point in time. The application will ask you if you have them or if you're in progress. It's absolutely fine if you do not have them and you have not started yet. There will be time. I recommend you go ahead and get started, especially if you appear to be eligible for this grant. You do not have to have those processes complete by February 15th when you apply.
And I'll say one thing about the technical assistance partners. There's a lot of them and they're all great. And I will also say one of the things I particularly appreciate, because we struggle with this with RISCA, is that a lot of them offer technical assistance in languages other than English, which is really valuable. So one thing I will just shout out is the Center for Women in Enterprise is like, they're not focused on arts, but they do have some of the language around arts, but so does the Center for Southeast Asians. So, you know, like a lot of these folks really may not speak arts fluently, but they understand really small micro businesses or folks who are just really sole proprietors with no employees, like y'all, who are just making work and then selling it. Hopefully we want you all to be selling it. Past RISCA grants. So I'll say one thing too, that I know I've gotten a lot more email questions about this than questions here, is that these grants are through Commerce. They're totally separate than RISCA grants. I just really wanted to make sure y'all knew that these grants existed and had access to them, and wanted to help y'all get the application done. So a couple of things on that. RISCA individual artist grants do not require a DUNS number or SAM.gov, because we're not using federal money, we're using state money. So we can have a lot more flexibility there. So if you've just applied for a RISCA grant, you likely do not have a DUNS number and a SAM.gov number. Secondly, receiving or applying for a Commerce grant will have no impact on any of your grants from RISCA. So like not the Artist Relief Fund if we end up getting funds to reopen that, but definitely not things that are open right now, like the Make Art grant or Community Engaged Project grant. So please just apply for this. It will have no impact in your RISCA granting. They're totally separate. And I want you to get as much money as you are eligible for.
Can I also note this wasn't a requirement of previous grants that Commerce offered here in Rhode Island. The original like CARES Act funding and CRF funding that we used for earlier grants had an explicit exemption from the federal uniform guidance regulations. And unfortunately, the ARPA dollars, the state fiscal recovery funds that are specifically funding this grant program, do not include that exemption. So believe me when I say we went back and forth with our legal and our consultant group and reading the Treasury guidance, because we sort of recognize the DUNS and the SAM.gov process are a bit labor intensive, and many of you will not need it for anything other than this grant. But again, it's free to apply. We do have technical assistance, so please don't let that be a barrier to applying to this program.
So we have about 3 minutes left. So I am going to say, Ted, I took note of your specific question, and I will get with Kara and we will get back to you. And one of my goals and things that I will talk to Kara ASAP about is how we should be funneling specific questions to Commerce. And if there's a direct contact for y'all, it might make sense for questions to come to me. I can do an FAQ, but we'll let you know. So on that note, with the final 3 minutes, I'd love if we could just talk through all of this unemployment stuff like a little bit more, because there's a lot of questions about, you know, regular unemployment, pandemic unemployment that comes to you as a person versus what comes to your business. Folks that were on PUA and getting PUA unemployment for the first time. If somebody got $200 a week in regular unemployment, but another $400 on top of that is only the $400, the COVID part. So there's lots of questions. I'm just going to turn it over to you.
So I think that I do want to go back and make sure I am very clear, because I don't want to steer anyone incorrectly. What we were looking at as needing to be included in your need calculator when calculating whether or not you had a net financial need due to revenue loss was specifically the pandemic unemployment. which is a little bit separate than the regular unemployment insurance. So I want to go back and make sure with my team, I get you guys a very clear answer on whether or not you need to include any UI in the 2021 calculation. And I apologize, my dog just chose to bark, so very sorry. And so we do get a lot of questions about like, well, unemployment is not business revenue, right? The challenge that we have is when you're a sole proprietor, so you were not able to get any business revenue for a point in time. So you got the pandemic unemployment to offset that, is we have to be careful with federal funding going to the same types of costs or expenses. So if you're using the revenue from your business to pay yourself, and then you were able to access the pandemic unemployment to replace that lost revenue that you would have used to pay yourself, we wanted to make sure that there isn't a double dipping of the federal funds. So let me go ahead and make sure I go back and get a really clear and distinct answer, and I will provide that to you, Molly.
Great. So what I will say to y'all is that I will work on over the next 24 hours, one, getting this up and getting it on YouTube so we have the recording, but also creating an FAQ that will include these sort of things, loose ends that we've asked, and other things coming up that have come up a lot. I will say I'm getting some questions about folks that if they started a business in 2020 or 2021, are they eligible and how is the revenue loss calculated?
If you started your business before October 1st of 2021, you are eligible. If you are in operation in 2020 and 2021, if you go to our grant calculator, you'll be able to select that from the drop-down menu. It'll ask when your business was established, and you'll see a specific grant calculator that is a little bit different than for our older, more established businesses. And so for these newer businesses, what we're asking you to calculate is your revenues versus expenses. So a little bit of a broader calculation, and we're really just looking to see if you are operating at a loss in 2021. I'm going to pop our website one more time in the chat because there's been so many messages. I just want to pop it in one more time for anybody that didn't grab it.
So I'll likely add a whole new web page to our website. We'll push it out on social media tomorrow. And then if you you all registered for the event, right? So once I get that FAQ page up, I'll email it to you as a follow-up. And then if you have any like weird outstanding questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to email me. I'm pretty sure you all have my email address, but again, here it is. And the link to the grants calculator, you can get there if you go to, yeah, it's on there, right?
Yep, so on our website, all of the links to apply, if you want to just go to the grant calculator first, if you want to see the get ready to apply checklist to see a one-pager of eligibility, all of that's on our website.
Okay, thanks y'all.
All right. Thank you so much.